Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and today we have with us Professor Robert Denemark, one of the more senior and distinguished faculty members in the political science department at the University of Delaware. And he's a very good friend, but he's more like a mentor to me. Every time I've had important decisions to make about my career, what to do after tenure, what to do, what to focus on in order to become a full professor, I have always gone to Bob, who has given me great advice. And Bob got his PhD from University of Minnesota, 1987, if I'm not mistaken, and he has been a professor now for several years at the University of Delaware. He focuses on understanding the evolution and the changes in the systems globally, has a historical view of international relations. He teaches IR theory and international diplomacy. And for those of you who are students of international relations, if you are familiar with the work of Wallerstein or Andre Gunder Frank, and I think Bob was or is still part of that school of thought, the world systems theory approach, which unfortunately we don't teach as much now, Bob. Otherwise, it used to be the main alternative to modernization theory when we taught intro to comparative politics. So last week, Professor Bob Denemark gave a brilliant lecture in the political science colloquium in which he talked about preemptive decline. And if I'm not mistaken, what he was trying to say is when elite in a society and leaders in a society fear preemptive decline, in order to prevent that decline, they may indulge in reckless behavior or reckless decision making or implement reckless policies, which might actually expedite the decline rather than delay it or prevent it. In fact, if they completely misread the situation, if there was no chances of decline, they might be the reason why there is a decline. So I think I found that very interesting, especially given the times that we live in, not just because Donald Trump is president of the United States, but also things that are happening in the world. So first, Bob, welcome to Khanversations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and for the kind words.
So I want to begin by asking you a very simple question. What do you mean by preemptive decline? And what are you talking about in empirical terms when you talk about decline, and which decline is worrying you?
Well, let's start with the question of what kind of decline I'm looking at. Decline is not a unitary phenomenon. Okay, if we're talking about great powers, then decline is about a loss of capacity. If we're talking about empires, it's control over the colonial elite. If we're talking about civilizations, it's control over what people think and believe and their practices. But I'm much more interested in hegemony and hegemonic decline. Hegemons are so powerful that they make the rules of the game. And usually those rules tend toward peace and stability because that's how the world and the hegemon makes its money and maintains its power. Once it begins to lose control over that game, once it begins to lose control over the rules, it is in decline. Now, that doesn't mean it's not still a great power, maybe even an empire, but it has lost a substantial amount of its ability to make the world work in its interest.
So basically you're saying that as long as a dominant player or a hegemon continues to have the capacity and power to shape the rules of the game, it is not in decline. When it loses control. Yeah,
for hegemony, it's all about the rules. Any dominant power can pick on any other power. That's not very interesting. Hegemons do it differently. They craft a different kind of system and maintain it. And when they begin to back away from that because they don't understand what they're doing, or because it's no longer popular, or because they don't think they can sustain it, or because they don't think they're getting a big enough cut and big enough margin, then they are declining as hegemonic powers.
in an in a seminar that I took with Professor Nicholas Onuf, if you know of him,
Okay.
I consider him as the father of constructivism in international relations, and we were having trouble understanding what it meant to be what a structure of international relations was, and so he said it's very simple, Muqtedar. It has two elements: rules and resources. That is what a structure is. So, from the realist perspective, you look at the resources or capacity or power, and the distribution of that power is the structure. They ignore the rules mostly, but constructivists add on to that and they bring the rules in it. So, when you talk about potential decline, is it also the fear of reduction in the control of resources rather than just the rules that could be?
Oh, absolutely. The my concern with preemptive decline is that leaders panic. They perceive themselves as being in decline long before, by the way, there are any physical manifestations of that long before the data show any real decline. But they're concerned, and so they're taking action to try to regain dominance. Now, they look at the world and they look at the rules and they say, well, this is interesting, but everybody gets ahead, not just us. We should be the ones always getting ahead. And so they attack the institutions that they have created to keep the peace and to keep the resources flowing.
So, I mean, clearly, you are also hinting at the current resident of the White House, and we are also talking about the significant changes that we are seeing in both domestic and foreign policy. So, this whole idea of MAGA, making America great again, actually assumes that America has declined rather than anticipating decline. So, this is more, MAGA is more of a reaction to what they perceive as decline that has already happened. And therefore, they want to fix the decline or work towards a revival. Where does this reality fit into your question of perception that decline is coming and therefore we need to prevent it as opposed to revive?
So there are three elements to preemptive decline. There's this tremendous desire to regain dominance, and that includes things like over-optimism and overemphasis on winning traits and hyper-confidence. Then there's a tendency toward violence, questions of identity. Who are we? Who are they? Shouldn't we be in charge of they? Enforcement of norms, concerns with potential losses. And then there's something I call reversion to tradition, where people ask questions about the founding myths of us and how can we get back there. And we see time and again in history, when we look at hegemons or civilizational leaders, the occasional superpower, they look internally to try to understand whether they're still dominant externally. And so for the British, one of the first real elements of concern that showed up in their newspapers was the decline of the Anglican Church. Right? And the question was, but who are we? And wasn't that part of our dominance? And shouldn't we get back to that? And so we must be in decline. Sometimes changes like that are normal. They're natural. They go along with the historical progression of great powers and hegemons. But we panic, and if you want to make it simple, we take it out on everybody else, right? If we're not feeling good about the way we look internally, we're going to take over Greenland, right? We're going to show them. It wastes our time, it wastes our money, it wastes our blood, it wastes our resources.
So there's a psychological dimension to this, right? Like, for example, sometimes when kids are misbehaving, we interpret that as a desire for attention, that they are being neglected, so they are being naughty. And usually naughty children are also from amongst those who are the more intelligent of the kids in the dorm.
Right, they're bored.
Yeah. So the question really is that what aspect is Donald Trump and his supporters worried about? So, for example, he has made English the national language. And when he made that, I was laughing about it. I said he's worried that people who don't speak English are taking over America. Isn't that why he's making it a national language? But what is he trying to really fix? Is he trying to fix decline of American power vis-a-vis other countries in the world and therefore decline of American hegemony worldwide? Or is he trying to fix something which is internal, that at least he sees as that there is some erosion or corrosion that is taking place inside the country, which will then lead to decline externally? So where do you see Donald Trump?
Trump is not the first American leader to fall into the spiraling hole of who are we and what is our identity. And if we can get back to an authentic identity, then we can regain our power and be great again. And this is, of course, a myth. Anybody who actually reads history knows that most hegemons have been multicultural in nature. That's in fact one of their great strengths. They're innovative. They keep getting influxes of new and interesting peoples. Those peoples eventually accommodate to various things going on. But this is really scary to the old guard. Okay, this is really scary to the folks who are watching it happen. Watching jobs disappear, watching neighborhoods change. Now, those jobs would have disappeared and those neighborhoods would have changed anyway. But when we start to talk about identity, we're starting to talk about who is to blame. See, I couldn't possibly have lost my job if things were right and fair. My neighborhood would never change just because it's 30 years old, and that's really what's going on here. He is capturing not just the fear in the elites of decline, but the questions of identity and fear in the masses. And that's who is supporting him.
If we look at decay of values, right, in some ways, that you have you have a clear conception of what is an identity, who you are, and then you find those values. So for me, this is all very familiar territory, because since 1850s, Muslims have been talking about why we have declined, why was the Ottoman Empire ended, why did the Mughal Empire end, and most people's answers are that our identity is collapsed because we have abandoned our true values of Islam. When we were good Muslims, we were great, and now that we are bad Muslims, we are down. So this is very familiar territory for Muslims. And I think that that's potentially, in some ways, is what the MAGA people are also trying to do, that there were certain values that made America a great country, and now those values are being attacked, especially by the LGBTQ movement, etc. But isn't that a fact that there is a change in what it means to be a good American today, isn't it? There is a change in what it means to be, what are American values? If I had asked my students this question in 1950s or 1960s and now, I think the answer would be very different. Like, what should America's democracy protect at home? Wouldn't that be true, that there is a shift in values and he's reacting to that?
He is. The big question, of course, is, are the values that made a country great, the original values that made our country great, still relevant 100 or 125 years later? Are we to assume that those values are and must be fixed? Usually, what makes a great hegemon, a great country, a great corporation, is the ability to be flexible, to change with the times, to take in new ideas and new individuals. Now, once we start reacting against that, then we look at every change, right, that's taken place and say, well, that's getting us away from what made us great. No, That's part of what made us great. It might be overdone in some areas or underdone in other areas. But the attempt to go back to what our values were in 1780 probably isn't going to be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we could go back before and then start having slavery, etc., as a surviving institution. You just reminded me of something that Thomas Jefferson used to uh, say. He says he's felt that every generation should have their own constitution. And what we have done is we have made it so difficult to change the US Constitution that, in a way, we live under the moral tyranny of the past, right? In many, many ways, unable to change the Constitution. We need to have a huge consensus in a country which is increasingly polarized. So let me try and spin this around. A lot of people who are talking about decline are also Democrats, also progressives. And since the election of Donald Trump, there is this huge panic among liberals and others that they are seeing a decline. So they are behaving in exactly what we are talking about, Donald Trump behaving. So is it possible that the liberal panic about Donald Trump's presidency, which I don't know how much damage he can do in 4 years, but the panic from the liberals, do you think that could result in reckless responses which might expedite the decline of America, since both parties now are behaving in fashion which will, expedite decline from your theoretical perspective? Now, everybody in America potentially is politicking out of fear of decline.
There's a big difference between preemptive decline, that is, when we fear we're in decline, and actual decline. My work has been focused on preemptive decline. That is, what do we see that makes us afraid before we need to be? I'm not sure that the liberals in the United States aren't looking at palpable attacks. That is, they're not preempting, okay? They are in decline. Then the question becomes...
Like democratic values. You mean democratic values are in decline because of what?
Yes, exactly. And so then the question becomes, will they act in the same ways that I've sort of spun out all the literature on management and org theory and social psych? And the answer is probably yes. There'll be an inward turn where we ask, who are we, right? Who are the progressives? If we are progressive, what does that mean? There'll be an identity exaggeration period. There'll be an enforcement period. The tendency in preemptive decline is to find a tremendous restriction of information and centralization of decision making. I'm not sure if the progressive wing in this country will fall prey to that, because one of their hallmarks is that they're inclusive, right? But they might. They might decide they're in full-on panic mode, and the 6 most important people have to get together and decide the fate of the rest of the progressive movement. It's going to be ugly, though, in great part because that issue of identity turns us all a little crazy. We keep looking for the magic key, and there probably isn't a magic key. And we keep escalating to try to do better. And we become a bit apocalyptic in all this, rightly or wrongly. But it doesn't foster good decision making necessarily. So yes, I think that when Nick Onif is a brilliant man. When he taught you, he's speaking more about hegemony as a set of ideas. When you break those ideas down, it's another way of defining hegemony. When you break those ideas down and the norms that go with them, what you have is a free-for-all. What you have is a bar fight. And that's not going to look pretty for anybody.
So it comes back originally, like, for example, Donald Trump's whole refusal to continue the same policies towards Ukraine as the previous administration, and this constant fear that he's going to pull out of NATO, if not weaken NATO or not fulfill the promises of Article 5, is also making Europeans ask this question as to who are we?
Right. That's right.
I find it ridiculous that Germany, with a GDP which is twice that, or it's nearly 2.2 times bigger than Russia, is frightened of Russia. Yes, it doesn't have nuclear weapons, but still, if you have tremendous conventional deterrence, you don't have to really fear a country which is half your economy. But what is the connection between identity and decline? Is it that decline is seen as loss of power, loss of stature, which is external? Or is it actually a systemic pressure to abandon what you think is right, which is change your identity, like stop being a racist, conservative person and become more progressive, inclusive, and tolerant? So is there a pressure, the systemic pressure to change what you think are good values? Is the inability to resist that pressure, is that a decline? Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yes. It's certainly a threat. There's no question about that. And the problem with identity questions is there is no golden correct answer. Our identities are forged in great part from our myths and our stories. And our myths and our stories are not unitary, right? They mean different things to different people in different eras. And when we fear decline, we begin to try to define those myths and stories, and hence our identity, in a new and very pressureful world. And that's what makes people fearful, and that's what makes people make bad decisions. What is Germany going to look back to?
That is true. That's a very good question. Like,
Yeah.
For them, the more they move away from their past, the better it is.
The better it is. And the Europeans have adopted a very interesting global social experiment, the European project. And the European project, in great part, rests on the fact that we have a relatively peaceful world, that Europe can be inclusive. It's the right thing to do. If other people don't do it, that's up to them. But once you begin to break down all of these hegemonic norms and rules and institutions, and Germany has to look in the mirror and say, well, can we go it alone? Then their myths become something else. Their stories become something else. Look at the alternative for Germany.
Yeah, I mean, that's a scary party, but it's very interesting. My question about identity is also that it is also socially constructed, and it is also a function of who has the dominant narrative, right, about identities or products of narratives. I don't think that Donald Trump or any of his supporters really wants to live in an America of 1960s or 1950s, etc. Yeah, and so there is an imaginary America that they want to reconstruct. They want to bring back an America that actually never existed.
Right.
Are we giving too much credit, too much intellectual credit to this project, or is it just that a segment of America, which is essentially white Christians who have actually become alive as a political force, and they just want to redefine American nationalism as America is for white Christian people, period. So, I mean, everything else is just a gambit, right? Is that the possibility? Because we see similar ethno-nationalist movements all across the world.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Is it just a gambit? I hate to do this to you, but the answer is yes and no. There are true believers out there.
Yeah, of course.
And there are true believers both in the elite and in the mass public. Then there are people who recognize this fear and in an entrepreneurial manner wish to take advantage of it to move policy in the direction they want. Whether they believe it or not, you'll never get them to say, right? Then there are people who really don't care. Okay, they're going to ride the wave.
Yeah.
In that sense, Donald Trump is the tip of an iceberg. I don't think he's leading the charge. I think he's following along. I think his first 4 years were a shock to him. He didn't think he'd be elected. He didn't have a program or a project. He was going to be Donald Trump, and he was going to see where it got him. Now he is much better managed. So much so that his people can tell him during the election, shut up and sit down and don't say anything and you'll win. And he'd listen. Amazing. And they brought a program into office, which we are seeing played out now.
You know, Bob, one of the things that I noticed when I contrast, say, Muslim societies to Western societies, I noticed that in Western societies, whether you are, regardless of where you are in the ideological spectrum, there is this public value of appreciating somebody who is rational and secular. So even religious people hide their motivations if they are religious and try to project that as a secular and rational terms. Whereas in the Muslim world, it's the other way around. Your motivation could be just greed and power, and you pretend that you're doing in the name of God. Because being good Muslim is valued more than being rational, secular
Right.
in those societies.
Right. And wealthy.
Yeah. So my question to you is it possible that the thing behind Donald Trump's MAGA is essentially a Christian revival of sorts, where Donald Trump has become an unwitting tool of Christian nationalism and he's using them to win votes and support, and they are using him to change policies and change America?
It is quite possible. I don't think Donald Trump is using Christian nationalism. Well, I think Donald Trump is using Christian nationalism more than Christian nationalists are using Donald Trump. He is well known for his bizarre secular rational positions.
Yeah.
He's had to surround himself with willing members of various churches to testify to his status, even though he'll tell you he doesn't have such status. Yes, I mean, overall, I think what's going on is the United States, U.S. political parties are trying to cobble together winning coalitions. And the coalition of the fearful, wherever they come from, are a large and important and mobilizable group.
That is a very interesting concept, coalition of the fearful. So the sources of fear can be different.
Yes.
But they're coming together because they have, they don't have shared fears. They are just, what is shared is that they are motivated by fear. But the source of the fear could be, loss of religious values or loss of economic power or loss of racial dominance in the country. Various things could be motivated. Looking at the US, let's assume that Donald Trump is able to implement most of the policies that he wishes to. So what kind of America are we looking at 4 years from now? Like, what will actually decline? We're not going to go from $85,000 in per capita to 25. So like, what do you fear is going to decline?
I fear. Okay. My colleagues on the left like to take solace in the idea that in 2 years there will be an election, and that, among other things, the dominant political party in Congress will change.
You don't think there will be?
I don't believe there will be free and fair elections in 2 years. So I believe the president.
So you just booked another Khanversations for November 2026.
if they'll allow you on the air,
Yeah.
I'll be happy to join you. I think the president was clear about that. We are not going to have to worry about elections anymore. That's a quote. So I think that's going to be a change. I think any demonstration of solidarity among non-majority members will be looked down upon. I believe they will be attacked. I do not believe the government will attack them physically, and I do not believe the government will allow police forces to protect them either. So I'm looking for an increase in armed activity, armed militia activity, and a decrease in the degree to which the United States government is going to deal with that sort of problem, at least if it comes from the side currently in power. Okay.
I mean, this is not a very bizarre scenario. You see that in India all the time. A majoritarian government is in power, and thugs who share the ideology go around perpetrating violence, either under police protection or are not held accountable, and like vigilante killings, etc. You fear all of that? I mean, coming to America in 2026, it's not even 2 years from now.
I think we will see more of it. I mean, your question was, what do I think we'll see? What scares me? I think we'll see that, and I think that will be scary to me. I am concerned that fear of decline means that everyone must show deference to the current leadership. Loyalty is more important than anything else in this sort of situation.
You're making America you're making
that.
America sound like University of Delaware. But today the ICE has picked up a student leader from Columbia University, and they are planning to deport him. And they thought he was an international student, and they thought it would be very simple, revoke his visa, and he's gone. And then discovered that he's married to an American and is also a permanent resident. And apparently, so far, the news is that they are going to even revoke his green card.
Yes, I heard that.
And I was wondering, what if he was a citizen? Like, what would they do? Strip him of his citizenship in order to go forward? So yes, I can see some of those fears of yours. We can see the beginnings, the tips of the icebergs happening in many, many ways. But do you think that there are enough people inside the MAGA movement who might reverse their position, saying, oh, this is not what we wanted? And so that movement, with some of its excesses, might immediately become a minority rather than at the moment enjoying the power of majoritarian situation?
I don't think so. The United States or U.S. political culture in the last 25 years has polarized to the extent that if you are in power, you favor anything that keeps you in power. Now, some movements have defined anything more radically than other movements have. But I don't see, for example, the famous Berkeley free speech movement coming back around, where those on the extreme right and those on the extreme left get together and say, we should all have free speech. Okay. And that was a famous moment in American political history. And I don't see that in the immediate future. I think the current administration has pretty much put dissent in a box. And it's not just student leaders at Columbia. It includes upper level bureaucrats, people in the justice system, federal judges, senators. And so if you're asking me what I fear this imposition of unity around policies that are, in some respects, just silly and destructive.
Do you think that that America's movement towards this lack of tolerance for free speech. For example, J.D. Vance went to Munich and lectured the Europeans on freedom of speech, and then he's coming back, and the same government is like shutting down on freedom of speech.
Mhm.
But is this like a rupture in history? Or is it a continuum that this was also happening under the previous administration and previous? Look at the Democrats. They refused to allow any Palestinian American to speak at the Democratic Convention, including members of the Congress and those who were their own delegates from their own party. So the silencing of certain kind of speech was something that Joe Biden's administration was also taking part in, and if you go all the way back to G.W. Bush, you saw this, and then
Yes.
we have the history of McCarthyism in this country, which is not far away. So it's not as if there's a rupture. There seems to be like the pendulum is moving slowly in the right direction and rapidly in the wrong direction.
Well, the big difference seemed to me to be that it is one thing not to invite people who don't agree with you to speak. It is another thing to actively persecute them. Okay? And if it is a continuum, we've certainly passed the point where we've gone from not inviting you to join us on the podium to making sure we can kick you out of the country. There's a big difference.
Because there was no resistance to the first. So let me give you an example. I don't want to belabor this issue, but this is my last point on this, is that if you look at the three universities where there was the most aggressive action during the Biden administration, it was at the University of Michigan, it was at Columbia, it was at UCLA, all blue states governed by Democrats. And the brutality with which the Attorney General in Michigan is going after students from University of Michigan she's out to destroy their careers, period. So Democrats didn't object to that. So the next step is, okay, why destroy their careers when you can destroy their lives? And let's deport them. Like, it's the next step, the next logical step. If the country had objected to the previous step, then the next step would have been a big step, right? Now it's easy for the Donald Trump administration to take the next logical step because they are Democrats, did the previous steps too.
Possibly. I'm stuck on the difference between not inviting and dissent, and throwing out.
No, she's destroying them.
I think the weaponization of the Justice Department is going to go a long way.
Yeah, that is true.
Towards silencing dissent.
There is no doubt about that at all. And it's not just in some areas. It's going to be across the board. I mean, like you question, like, why are you cutting Medicaid, or why are you doing this, or why are you building this bridge or that bridge? I think it'll be across. I think even questioning the role of Elon Musk might be forbidden soon. Those kind of things, I wouldn't be surprised. This is my last question. Like, one thing that I noticed was, and this started happening after George W. Bush and his war on terror, the authoritarian steps that other governments were taking, they often justified their oppressive policies by just pointing to the United States and saying, look, the U.S. is also doing this because the U.S. is supposed to be the champion of democracy and human rights. And so the kind of things that Donald Trump is doing and will do can have, do you fear that all countries in the world will start behaving in the same way?
Oh, no, not all. It'll certainly be, it'll be much easier to do this, right? I mean, look at Musk's foray into British politics.
Yeah.
He wanted one of his favorite, more nationalist leaders to take a position against someone who was making outlandish statements.
Yeah.
The party wouldn't, and so he denounced them and walked away. So it'll be more difficult for those forces on the other side to get much support or do anything. But I guess the real question, Muqtedar, is this. when I say I don't believe there'll be free and fair elections in 2 years, a lot of people get very upset.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what should be done about that? Because sitting around saying, oh, that'll never happen, or, well, I don't think I can do anything, or I don't know what to do, is maybe not the smartest answer. And it's not just people on the progressive end. I think people who are conservatives should be rightly scared about what would happen if leadership switched. If I'm wrong and leadership switched, and some progressive force gets into power with all of the mechanisms that Trump has put into place, what are we as citizens going to do if we believe in, for example, free and fair elections or the rule of law?
Professor Vole, I don't know whether you know, he's a professor of history. He said something very interesting in the context of Pakistan. He says that if you make it legitimate and legal to discriminate against one community, then you have opened the door and then it becomes automatic. You will start legalizing discrimination itself or even institutionalizing discrimination.
Yes, so eventually that will happen.
Yeah, so if America gets used to extreme violent behavior and inhumane behavior against, say, immigrants or so-called illegal immigrants or undocumented people, so if the country gets used to seeing brutality by the state, then it's the next step of seeing that. See, right now there is no protest. He went from illegal immigrants to green card holders, and the next step will be to go to citizens, right? And so, and it's not necessarily going to be racial, and given the fact that he has people like Kash Patel, FBI, it's going to be basically political difference rather than racial and religious difference. Anybody who has a different political position will be under pressure. What would you suggest for professors to do going forward? This is my last question, Bob. What do you recommend that people like you and me should be doing in the next 2 years?
I keep asking my students, because I'm not sure I know what this generation wants. I keep asking my students, if these are things you support and they're being attacked, how should you organize to stop these sorts of things? Many of them are thoughtful. Some of them don't know. Some of them don't care. Others are interested in perhaps different kinds of mobilization or organization, ones that are not, certainly not traditional political parties, other sorts of movements. And I think as professors, we need to say to people, you have the right to be involved. You had the right to be involved before. This administration is proof that if you didn't like the system and you wanted to change it, you could. And we should retain that ability. Now, use your educations, use your networks to decide what you're going to do next. And if that is support for the current administration, or if that is dislike and counter mobilization, well, okay, take some action. Do not just sit around and wait to get a government job, because that ain't happening.
Yeah, I find it that that we are living in a world where the world demands our engagement. At least that is very clear, and I think our role is to present both sides of it and try to tell the students, look, this is the reality of the situation. If you want to see me deported, take these actions. If you want to take another class with me in the near future, this is
on Zoom.
Organize. Not organizing is not going to be the right answer, right? I have a feeling that perhaps before elections, I think the right for free association might go away before the election.
That is possible.
Yeah, because
that is possible.
Because it's a bit nebulous, right? It's impossible. It's easy to hide the inability to, like, certain kinds of associations are also not already allowed. You can't be a member of the Communist Party, for example. So you can't be a member of another party. You just have to change the name. Bob, it was wonderful talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to the book that when it comes out, and we will definitely talk about it. But my suggestion would be that while we stay prepared, we should not really panic with this perception of imminent decline and then take actions which contribute to it.
That's right, to further decline, either of the movement or the country.
Yep. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, Muqtedar, for having me.